This is Pilleater. Today is July 31st, 2023. I'm joined here with Carchel Payne, and today's guest we have on is Geoff Young. Hello.
Yeah, I
Hello.
want to just start off by saying, um, how did you get involved in politics as a young man? Like, were you inspired by your parents, or growing up in the '60s, did that inspire you?
Well, all of the above. I think I didn't really know anything about foreign policy or politics until my junior year in high school when I read a couple of books by Noam Chomsky about the war in Vietnam. So I was able to get into MIT and took two political science courses from him in 1976. And ever since then, I've been an anti-war activist. Uh, I didn't start running for office until 2012 here in Kentucky. I was born and grew up in Massachusetts, went to MIT and also UMass Amherst, and then moved to Kentucky in 1982 and been here in Lexington, Kentucky ever since. So I didn't start running for office until 2012 when I ran for the Kentucky State House of Representatives. And then ever since then, I've been running for the US House of Representatives every 2 years.
I
And
mean,
I
yeah,
won a primary actually for the first time ever, a Democratic primary in 2020, wait a minute, 2022 last year. Won my first primary ever. Didn't win the general election, or I would probably be in Washington now.
I mean, yeah, Kentucky has like a unique political history. Like, I think back in the day, it had like a strong tradition of populist Democrats, but right now it's like a fairly red state.
Yeah, it's purple in terms of number of registered Democrats and registered Republicans, but uh, the General Assembly, the Kentucky House and Kentucky Senate are totally dominated by Republicans. Our congressional delegation, we've got Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell as senators. We have 5 Republicans and 1 Democrat in Louisville in the US House. So it votes very red.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it must be hard to be in a state where like it's ruled by like basically one political party.
It's ruled by both. Um, so every time I've tried to run, um, the Democratic Party has rigged the primary against me illegally. There's a Kentucky statute that says, in layman's terms, any party that has primaries may not rig them. So they rigged them all. In 2020, I ran in the Republican primary because the Democrats were totally corrupt. And I discovered that the Republican Party of Kentucky rigs their primaries too. They're equally corrupt, 100% corrupt, both parties.
I mean, yeah, like it's tough to run in a two-party system. Like I mean, the decks are stacked against you if you're an independent and you try to run. I mean, Ross Perot found it out in the '90s.
Yeah, that's right. So it's totally rigged against third parties too.
I mean, yeah, I mean, to this, I mean, for example, to get on like stage, they say you have to reach like the 15% threshold. And is a
Well, yes, unless you want to gather thousands of petitions every time you run. And that's really hard. So, you know, and the number of petitions you have to get, the signatures is just ridiculous. As a Democrat or a Republican, you have to get 2 signatures plus your own. They have to be notarized. To run for like governor of Kentucky or any statewide office, Secretary of State, Attorney General, you need 5,000. But they don't have to be notarized.
I mean, yeah, you know, like in the Democratic and Republican candidates, they don't have to reach the 15%. Like I
No.
remember back in 2016, you know, you had Martin O'Malley try to run. It's like nobody outside of Baltimore even knows who he is. He got only 1%, yet he can go on stage and Jill Stein has to raise 15%.
Right. Yeah, so that's Kentucky politics. What would you like to talk about in terms of other issues?
Oh, yeah. What do you think about what's currently going on in Ukraine? You know, that's been a thing since like last year. The war is still going on.
Yeah, February of 2022. That's when the war heated up. Actually, it started, I would say, back in 2014 when the US, Victoria Nuland, State Department, CIA, conducted an illegal coup and overthrew the elected president, who was kind of neutral between Russia and the EU. Ever since 2014, Ukraine has not been a democracy at all. It's been totally under the control of the US State Department, CIA, Pentagon, NATO, and groups of Ukrainian Nazis who have spent the last 9 years physically attacking ethnic Russians in the Donbass. So this war didn't start in February 2022, but when it did heat up last year, I realized very quickly that the Ukrainians had no chance. Even when the Russian troops in Ukraine were completely outnumbered, they were still destroying the Ukrainian army. And so I think it's just a matter of weeks before Ukraine won't have any army left. When that happens, then it's completely up to Russia what will occur in that country.
Oh, yeah. When you ran against Andy Bashir, what was your platform? You know.
Okay, it was focused more on Kentucky issues than foreign policy. I ran on mainly earlier this year, on the issue of his very poor response to the COVID-19 crisis or incident or whatever you want to call it, a COVID-19 phenomenon, let's call it that. He instantly fell in line with Dr. Fauci and the federal public health agencies and believed everything that they were saying, and promoted vaccination. Bashir is a Democrat, and so starting in, let me think now, he took office in January 2020, and that's when everything started to happen. He just believed it all. And my position was I wouldn't have believed a word Fauci was saying. I'm very suspicious of federal government leaders or officials. I don't believe anything until I've checked it out with reliable sources. So I never got jabbed because I didn't. I was seeing all kinds of articles in the online, not in the mainstream media, but alternative media saying that this is not safe. It's not effective. Natural immunity is better. There are ways to treat COVID or the flu or whatever it was, using ivermectin and other, vitamins, certain vitamins. And so when I got a positive test result for COVID about a year ago, I used ivermectin and vitamin D and zinc, vitamin E, and completely recovered in a week. My wife, who had been vaccinated, also recovered in about a week. So I was very critical of our terrible response. We had big lockdowns. We had, schools closed for months, and none of it was necessary. I would have done what Sweden did if I had been governor. And I ran for governor in 2019 against Andy Bashir and two other Democrats in the primary. They rigged it against me, and so he became governor. Oh, he beat the Republican in the general election, and I would have acted totally differently than he did. I would have demanded real evidence that these things were safe. Without real evidence, I would have asked the Republican-dominated Kentucky General Assembly to ban COVID-19 jabs in Kentucky, and they would have said, "Sure, we'll ban them."
COVID was a weird thing that happened.
My other issue was getting a state bank. Like North Dakota has a state bank that offers loans on good terms to for student loans and mainly for small businesses, helping finance small business expansions or whatever. And they've had it for more than 100 years. It's worked very well. So I would try to create a Kentucky state bank. Also tax reform with our Republican legislature. They keep increasing taxes on the poor, increasing the sales tax, and cutting taxes on the super rich. So I would try to reverse that. Probably the only way to reverse it would have been to start working with the Kentucky Democratic Party to find good candidates and defeat all these Republicans in Frankfurt.
Wow, that's amazing. North Dakota does have a state bank. The thing about North Dakota that in the past it was very progressive. Now, you got all these corporate politicians there.
Mm.
They just sell out to the biggest bidder, to the coal
Right.
companies and to the oil companies.
Yeah, fracking, very big. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I don't know what's happened to the Republican Party, but I don't know, maybe they read too much Ayn Rand, but they just want to destroy everything, and they think selfishness is a virtue or something silly like that.
Yeah, I don't think the Republican Party has changed very much, except, to get more intensified on the way they always were. I think it's the Democratic Party that has changed radically for the worse since, I guess, Bill Clinton, 1992. I think that marked the big shift in the Democratic Party, became as right-wing, as imperialistic on foreign policies as the Republican Party has always been, or, in my lifetime. Democrats were always pro-war, but if there was going to be a peace movement, it would have come from the Democratic Party in like the 60s, the 70s. But they've gotten much worse. 2016, I think, was a turning point where they just became pro-war, flat out pro-war, with the Russiagate conspiracy theory, which I think was basically false propaganda. Russia had nothing to do with our elections ever. I can name, 5 or 10 different entities that had much more meddling in our presidential elections than Russia. Russia had virtually none. So that was all a lie. And the Democrats just bought it. And, that became their only issue for several years. So both parties now are just really dangerous and destructive.
Yeah, and we got the election is coming up, and we got like two old people who are almost in their 80s running, and it's like, you think in America we'd be able to find some young person with fresh new ideas? We got like two dudes, two old boomers, almost
Uh-huh.
80 years old.
Yeah.
It's like, is this seriously the best we can do? Like two old guys?
Well, worse than being old. I mean, all right, so Trump still has his mental faculties, such as they were. Biden doesn't even have a functioning brain. But the problem is not their age, in my opinion. It's that they're both war criminals. They're both imperialists, neocons. They're identical on war and peace. Trump now running again in 2024. He's trying to sound like a peacenik and a reformer. He's going to drain the swamp again. Uh, uh, that message is politically very astute and very effective, powerful message. So if the election were, next week, and it was Trump versus Biden, and Cornel West as the Green, I think Trump would win in a landslide. I think Trump would wipe Biden out because he says things that more people can relate to. The Democrats have gotten incredibly tone deaf over since 2016. What's that? 7 years. It doesn't really matter how old they are if they're good people. But Trump and Biden are both war criminals. Should be in prison right now.
Yeah, and the thing about Trump is that he is very inconsistent. Like,
yeah,
he can be easily influenced. Like, one minute he wants to blow up everything, the next minute he's talking like Bernie Sanders. It's obvious that he doesn't have like a core ideology.
right.
He just goes with the wind.
Right. It goes with whatever he thinks will help his image.
I mean, that's not surprising. I mean, like Richard Nixon was his mentor, so Nixon was kind of the same way.
Nixon, I think. Well, all right. So I'm going to quote my former professor, Noam Chomsky, who calls Nixon our last liberal president.
Oh yeah,
the EPA, U.S. EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, was established with his approval during his term. I think it was 1972. maybe 73, I forget. So he was the last president who wasn't right wing. He made peace with the People's Republic of China. He established diplomatic relations. I don't know if I would go as far as Chomsky did and call him the last liberal president, but he was the last one who actually cared about issues. I don't know, I guess maybe that's not true. That he was the last one who was willing to make anything change. Since Nixon, I think it's been very hard to change anything about this country, legislatively or from the White House.
Oh yeah, you know Reagan made it worse.
Yeah, they all made it worse. We're in a very deep hole, and we seem to not be able to stop digging. But next year, I really support RFK Jr. for president. I really hope he beats Biden in the primaries, if Biden hasn't resigned already before that. And I think he's the only Democrat who can possibly beat Trump in 2024.
That's true. I mean, Bernie Sanders isn't going to run again. He's like,
I hope not. That would be, he would just humiliate himself. He wouldn't get much support.
I don't know. He got a lot of support in 2016.
Yes,
In
I
2020.
supported him then. But he blew it. He caved in to the establishment, to the DNC, to the donors. Yeah, he just didn't have what it took. He caved in twice.
Yeah, that's kind of true. Yeah. In my opinion, I think Jimmy Carter was the last liberal president because
Okay, yeah,
I say that
sort of
because
go with that.
Jimmy was willing to do stuff that, like drug legalization and stuff like that. Like that was
Okay.
actually talked about during his administration.
Yeah. All right, Jimmy Carter then. I'll go with that. Unfortunately, he also allowed war crimes to take place all over the world. So he was not so good on foreign policy, but he tried, at least he tried. He tried to do negotiations, settle the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I give him some credit.
Oh, yeah. That reminds me, Reagan actually, messed with the peace talks in Iran because he wanted to negotiate with the Iranians. So he said when he would get elected, he would negotiate with them. He did that.
Okay, yeah, I think you're talking about George Bush Sr., Vice President George Herbert Walker Bush, October surprise. So what year would that have been? When did Reagan come in? 1980? Yeah.
1981 is when he was elected.
Yeah. Elected in 1980. So his vice president used to be head of the CIA, and I agree. I think there's some pretty good case can be made that that George Herbert Walker Bush delayed the release of the hostages in the Iranian embassy until after the election, or after Reagan took the oath of office. The Iranians released the hostages that same day.
Pilleater, do you want to ask any questions for Mr. Geoff Young?
Yeah. What was Noam Chomsky like as your professor? And do you think his philosophy or opinions have changed since then or remain the same?
Well, I was kind of in awe most days I went. It was like hearing a public lecture almost, every class period. So it was very impressive. He often said, "Don't take my word for it. Check it out yourself and make your own judgments about what is true or false." So he didn't act in an arrogant or know-it-all manner. He said, "Well, he also said, a teacher is effective when is surpassed by his students. So if they take whatever the professor is saying and move it forward, develop it more, in his view, that was what a good teacher should aim for." And your second question, the second part of that was what?
Has his
Has
philosophy?
he changed? No, I don't think he has. I mean, there are a few issues where I've disagreed with him over the decades. Even today, he's unwilling to say that Russia's special military operation in Ukraine, starting in February 2022, was legal and moral according to the UN Charter. He hasn't reached the point of saying that, whereas I have, because I studied it in 2022. But he's really sharp still. I saw an interview of him taken a couple months ago, and he was just right on target. He's 93 now. Talks slower than he used to, but he's still phenomenal.
I mean, wow, that's interesting. I've always wanted to meet Noam Chomsky. I think he's like an anarcho, what is it, syndicalist or something?
Maybe, but he doesn't dwell on that. It's like being utopian, or it's like yeah, anarchists, we're so far from it today. Governments, nation states are still so entrenched that it's not even worth talking about. So, what might society be like 200 years from now, right? So, whether he's whatever kind of anarchist he might be, I think he admires the Kurds, some of the Kurdish communities in Iraq, Syria. I think it's called, Rojava. He admires what the Kurds are doing, but it's not really a current issue as to utopian anarchism, anything like that.
We are reaching the end of the show.
Okay.
Young, is there anything else you'd like to plug in or talk about in the last 5 minutes?
Well, I think what's most critical challenge or task facing regular people today, we have to end Western imperialism. And so that would apply to the people of Germany, France, and the United States, Canada. That is the biggest threat to peace, the biggest threat of starting a nuclear war. If Western imperialism, well, its goal is to subjugate or dominate the entire world if they can. And of course, the rest of the world doesn't agree. And so we have to end the power of the neocons, the military-industrial complex, the CIA. I think that's the most urgent task facing humanity today.
Geoff Young, thank you so much for being on.
Okay, thanks for having me.
And thank you, Cartrell Payne.
Thank you.